Welcome to Better Health Guy Blogcasts, empowering your better health. And now, here's Scott, your Better Health Guy. The content of this show is for informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any illness or medical condition. Nothing in today's discussion is meant to serve as medical advice or as information to facilitate self-treatment. As always, please discuss any potential health-related decisions with your own personal medical authority.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 28 of the Better Health Guy blogcast series. Today's guest is homeopath Joette Calabrese, and the topic is homeopathy and Lyme disease. Joette Calabrese is an international homeopathic consultant, author, educator, and sought-after speaker. She is an honorary board member of the Weston A Foundation, authors a 9-year running column in their international quarterly journal, and is a blogger who treats her readers to her homeopathic secrets. She began her formal study in homeopathy in 1986 and spends much of her time in Calcutta, India, in an ongoing fellowship with the Prasanta Banerji Homeopathic Research Foundation, where she's developed many of her techniques for teaching families how to use homeopathy instead of traditional allopathic medicines. Joette turned her back on conventional medicine over 35 years ago, became a highly respected homeopath, has met with and taught tens of thousands of people in her practice and teaching career, and most importantly, raised her now adult children without a single visit to a doctor, relying on homeopathy and sound nutrition instead. She empowers people with the ability to cure themselves and their families using her practical homeopathy methods and some guts, spunk, and moxie. And now my interview with Joette Calabrese. I am excited today to have Joette Calabrese on the show to share her experience with us about homeopathy in the context of Lyme disease. Welcome to the show, Joette.
Thanks for inviting me, Scott. I'm going to enjoy this, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. So how did you become interested in the treatment of Lyme disease with homeopathy? And is it a condition that you commonly find people approaching you looking for a solution?
Yes. And I live in Buffalo, New York area, and I actually live in the country where we have lots of deer. And so we're the next state over from where Lyme really proliferated in the last few decades, several decades, I would say probably 3. So it was early on in my work that I found folks. In fact, my father-in-law had it many years ago before most people knew nothing about it.
Right.
So yes, and I have found that homeopathy is a fabulous solution for Lyme. It's fast, generally.
So that's exciting, and I'm definitely looking forward to learning more about that. So let's start. Most of my listeners are probably dealing with more chronic Lyme rather than acute, but let's start with if someone gets bit by a tick and they have an acute Lyme, or they get bit by a tick and they have some symptoms that are starting, how might they use homeopathy to keep that from becoming a more chronic condition? And then what would you do after a tick bite to minimize the chances of that longer-term health impact?
Sure. Okay. So in homeopathy, we have a few medicines that are specific for bug bites, whether it leaves us with a bacteria infection from the insect or it's simply their venom. The number one that I use, that I when I first started in homeopathy some 35 years ago, is Ledum, Ledum, pilastrine. Now, Ledum, pilastrine are 200, and I've written about this on my blog. People are welcome to go there. I get lots of responses to this particular blog, the subject, and I always use Ledum 200 to start. So the moment we find the tick, the first thing we do, what I have always done in my own family, for our dog, for my children when they were little, for my husband, me, our goats. I mean, we live, we have woods all around us, and we don't have goats any longer, but when we did have them, and we had our children playing out in the woods, and they would come home with the tick, the first thing I would do was get the tick off in the proper way, and I would save the tick. Mm-hmm. If you throw it away, you're throwing away the evidence, and there's information in that should you ever need it. I never need it, and I don't believe most folks truly need it if they follow this procedure. This is tried and true. It's been around for 230 years, this method, so it's a good one. So we get the tick, put it in alcohol, vodka, the highest alcohol content of vodka, label it, the date, who it was found on, where it was found on that person. It was on the leg. It was on, my son Peter's leg on, September 10th or whatever. And then you put that aside. Now once you've gotten that going, now what you've done is you start with Leadum 200. And generally speaking, I use it every 3 to 6 hours. It depends on how severe I think the bite is. And what I mean by that is sometimes we don't know what kind of tick it is. Well, after a while, you get to recognize them. You say, oh, yes, that's a deer tick. And so we know what to do. But it can go anywhere between every 3 hours to every 12 hours. Generally speaking, I give it about every 6 to 12 hours in my family for a few days, sometimes a week. Now, I know that sounds vague, but through the years, I've become less concerned about it because it works every single time. And we've had plenty of these tick bites. Now, were they Lyme tick? Were they carrying Borrelia? I don't know. We never had them tested. But again, we do live within proximity of a state where it all began. And there are deer. We have a pond. We have hostas that the deer mow down every spring. So we have plenty of deer. And so far, it was never a cause of concern. So I only stopped at that. Now, some people will go further. They'll use, and I put this is on my blog too, I use Aurum arsenicum, and they can all look this up on my blog. You just key in Joette Calabrese Lyme, and you'll find it. You don't even have to go to my website. It'll just show up because I've written about it in a few separate places. So then there's a second homeopathic medicine that is specific for bacteria infections, Aurum arsenicum. And then if you're really concerned, you can always use what we call a no-sode, a homeopathic no-sode, actually made from the infective state, which is the bacteria, which is Borrelia.
So a couple things. So when you say Leadum 200, is that a 200C dilution? Is that what we're talking about?
I always leave that vague because if someone's in Switzerland, they might only have X's available, or in India, of course, you're not going to get Lyme in India most likely, but I always leave it open so you can use X or C. Lately, it seems as though C's are the most common in Europe and North America. So I guess I could say C. Okay.
And when you talk about a no-sode, is it that you could then take those ticks that you had collected and preserved in alcohol and actually create a homeopathic remedy
you could
from
do that.
Okay.
You absolutely could do that. Now, I have not done that because I like it diluted a number of times, 30 times to the 100th power, or 200 times to the 100th power, or to the 10th power, and that's work. But if you need to do it, you certainly have that possibility. But I know in advance, or I knew in advance, and everyone who is concerned about this might want to have these medicines on hand, so that you don't have to make it yourself. But yes, indeed, that's one of the interesting aspects of homeopathy, that you can make your own medicines yourself.
Well, and I think it makes total sense to have Leadum on hand. As you mentioned, I get emails. In fact, I just got an email from a practitioner this morning that their child or friend's child or someone had a tick bite, and what should they do? And if you have that on hand, you can certainly get started before these microbes have an opportunity to really affect you on a longer term basis.
Well, that takes us to another discussion too, Scott. In my estimation, it is that if you want to use medicines that are not of commerce, if you want to use non-patented medicines such as homeopathy, then you kind of have to plan that in advance. It would behoove someone to simply own these medicines in advance. And the way you do that is you take a course in homeopathy and first aid, or you own a homeopathy kit, because in the kit, it is already determined in advance that, of course, you're going to get an insect bite at some point or another. I might also add parenthetically that Leadum is a great medicine for any animal bite. Rat bite, dog bite. Our duck got bitten by a fox. We used Leadum and it kept no infection ever ensued, although it was amazing that it didn't. I don't want to go into the graphic aspect of that bite, but it was pretty severe. And we used Leadum. And so there are others. It's not the only one, but it is one of the most readily available and one of my favorites to use. So if you decide you're going to go this route, you don't wait, and not to disparage the person who said that to you, but you don't wait until it happens to say, gee, what should I do about animal or tick bites? No, have that set up in advance. And I teach that all the time. I teach it for free on my blog. It's all there for anyone to learn in advance.
And I think if I remember correctly from looking at your site, you even have ways that people can access some of these kits ahead of time so that they have the products.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. So let's say that someone's gone beyond the acute stage. They didn't treat initially like we're talking about here. They start developing symptoms. In some cases, maybe years have gone by before they get to a practitioner that actually says maybe Lyme disease is the problem. So how do you then approach using homeopathy to treat someone with later stage Lyme disease? And then what aspects of chronic Lyme can homeopathy help to address?
Well, here's the thing that I veer differently than many other practitioners, such as, oh, look, there you are. I can see you better. I should probably put them on a long time ago. I veer from that because, and I think homeopathy does in general, not all homeopaths, but generally speaking, this is where we veer a little bit differently. Let me step back and say that there are 100 trillion cells in the human body. That's what we are told at this point in history. And we're also told that 90% of those cells are not human. So then what is it that we're made up of? What is that 90%? If 10% of us is human and all the rest is not, then we have to determine what that is, and that would be microbes.
Yes.
Viruses, bacteria, parasites. We could go on and on about what this is all made up of. So I always wonder how, when you take a case and say this must be a Lyme case, that you know for sure that it's Lyme. Couldn't it be herpes?
Or if Lyme is present, is that the thing that's driving the person's symptoms?
Precisely.
Right.
Because Lyme will often be present. Why? Because Lyme is pretty ubiquitous in North America.
Yep.
And in Europe. In fact, the guy they found in the Alps, and he was from 3,300 BC. They suspect that he had Lyme.
I saw that, yeah.
So if we think that this is different now, it's not. I don't think it's different. I mean, I think there's more of an awareness. We have our beloved internet to get more information out to folks. We have more tests. But how do we know it's not strep that's driving this? How do we know it's not staph? How do we know that it's not herpes? We could go on and on with this. How do we know it's not menopause? What if it's menarche? There's so many aspects of a human body that I believe that if we focus too much on one possibility, we may miss a huge aspect of what's going on.
So that I think is definitely true. And I always tell people that we really are a bug bus, meaning that we're outnumbered by the microbes in us and on us. And we're driving around all of these microbes thinking that we need to eradicate them to be us. But the reality is, if we eradicate them, we also can't survive, right? We need many of these microbes. Right. So maybe that leads to the question then in someone that has what they identify as chronic Lyme or fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue syndrome, do you need to know what microbe is involved potentially in order to use homeopathy to move that person forward?
That's the $1,000,000 question, and I believe the answer is it is not necessary.
Okay.
Because homeopathy was organized, it was thought about and considered many centuries ago, but it wasn't until Dr. Samuel Hahnemann organized it and put it together back in the late 1700s in Germany. And the microscope was discovered, or invented, I should say, not discovered. It was invented just around the same time, and microbes were not even considered for another century. So it was unnecessary, because if someone had been bitten by a tick in Germany and was treated by Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, he would not have said, gee, I wonder if this could be Lyme, or I wonder if it's strep or staph or herpes or whatever. No, he used what presented. What presented is screaming at us, and those are called symptoms. Okay. So symptoms, the other word for symptoms are signs. So symptoms never, or the signs of illness never lie, except in the circumstances in which someone's taking a medication, a conventional medication. Then those symptoms that present could be side effects.
Right.
Or as I like to call them, effects. So not usually, it's not like, the Brussels sprouts on the side. No. We're talking about the meat in the center of the plate. So I believe that drugs cause effects and often long-term effects. So if that's the case, now we have to kind of sift through what we've got and what we suspect and etc. But the bottom line is we're looking for signs. What are the signs? They're symptoms. The symptoms present as what? Headaches, fatigue, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia,
joint pain.
Yeah, absolutely. Anxiety, depression, a foggy brain. Those can be sitting there in conjunction with Lyme, strep, staph, etc., co-infections, co-bacterial infections, leaky gut. It is too difficult to figure out the exact microorganism that's causing that. And that's where I believe that we end up going down long, painful, neurotic sometimes, because that is what happens to us when we go down these rabbit holes. These rabbit holes can cause a lot of confusion. And in the confusion and during the confusion, we see a lot of folks suffering terribly. But we still haven't gotten rid of, let's go after it with an antibiotic. As you know, antibiotics have fewer positive features as far as I'm concerned than a prepaid phone. Because in the long run, you're going to end up buying a real phone. So, there are times when antibiotics in history have been very valuable, but I believe that they're at best superfluous these days. So if we go down those rabbit holes, we can go down many of them, and that can cause, in my estimation, anxiety and neurosis.
So if someone comes to you and they have symptoms that lead you to a specific homeopathic remedy that may help with those symptoms, if they did have, let's say, confirmed strep and Borrelia and all of these other things, do those remedies then help the body to somehow eliminate those organisms, or is it helping us to be able to live in better harmony with them? What is the remedy actually doing in the body?
Well, the remedies don't kill bugs. Mm-hmm. That's a pesticide. Okay. You know what I mean? Or that's an antibiotic. They're there to toss napalm into the body and alleviate. And that is not the method that homeopathy uses. Mm-hmm. Thank goodness. Instead, we use the symptoms to determine which homeopathic medicine is best chosen for that condition, regardless of the etiology. Now, if we happen to know the etiology, then we're not going to ignore it, of course. If we know that the woman is suffering, for example, from chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, and she's perimenopausal, then we also want to consider that aspect of it. Now, is she or isn't she? Well, now we're looking for hormonal conditions as well. That, she's having difficulty sleeping at night, she's gaining weight inadvertently, she's getting hot flashes, etc., etc. There are genitalia changes, etc. So now we're using that information. What is presenting, not what is the microorganism. Because let me step aside for a moment and say, when a child has a sore throat, is it strep? Is it just garden variety sore throat? Is it sinuses that are draining and causing rawness? Is it as a result of the pollen? Is it from screaming too loud? It is what it is. Tell me what the symptoms are. There's hoarseness and pain. We use a remedy that's specific for that, and that's all we need to know. And it will uproot the condition regardless, pretty much regardless.
So in someone, let's say they've had what they identify as chronic Lyme for 10 years, they're largely bedridden, would we say that homeopathy could be used as a monotherapy and could result in that person recovering from their symptoms?
Yes.
Okay.
But we're not treating symptoms. It's different than with allopathy. Allopathy treats symptoms. They're just trying to soften the discomfort. No. Homeopathy uses, again, this is our information. Symptoms actually, and I don't mean to be unkind to those who are suffering, because I've had chronic illness in the past myself, and I know how awful it can be. But symptoms are actually a gift. They tell us, they give us information from which to make our decisions as to which homeopathic medicines to use. So let's go back to that person who's bedridden because they're fatigued and because they have severe fibromyalgia. Now we use the homeopathic medicine that is specific specific when someone has fibromyalgia, regardless of the etiology. Mm-hmm. What if that person shows that there was an infection of Lyme, but that's not the cause? What if it turns out the fibromyalgia is a hormonal shift, or it's a hormonal shift in conjunction with Borrelia? Or what if it's staph, and nobody's thought about the fact that this child or this person as a child had staph infections frequently, and they were suppressed by antibiotics, and now what we're seeing is the result of that. There are too many conditions in the human body to be able to say, it's that one. Too simplified. In my estimation, it's too simplified. Now, sometimes you hit it. Sometimes I do hear people who have hit it, but it is rare. I get the folks who tell me, well, we used antibiotics. Well, if it was indeed Borrelia or a co-bacterial infection, why didn't the antibiotic cure it? Because it's usually not just that. And then even let's say it was just that, now the antibiotics cause leaky gut and ulcerative colitis and chronic constipation, or alternating of constipation with diarrhea, or food intolerance. Now they can't eat anything with dairy. They can't have gluten. Oh my gosh, we're getting worse. Wait a minute, I thought I had Lyme. Now I've got chronic illness, serious chronic illness. I can't digest. I can't eat here, can't go there. I'm in bed 2 hours every day because of the chronic fatigue, etc. So we need to go deeper and more. I guess we need to be more elegant about this instead of just throwing napalm. It's like pesticides. Really? Let's be integrative in the way we grow our garden.
So is there ever a scenario where, let's say, my next question was going to be about Bartonella and Babesia and homeopathy, and you kind of already answered it by saying that, well, we would look at the symptoms that were present in that person and use homeopathy to treat the symptoms.
No, but I'm going to change it, Scott. Excuse me for interrupting.
To treat based on the I understand what you're
you've seen the symptoms. We're not treating symptoms. We don't do it that way. Yeah.
So to treat the condition based on the symptoms, guiding you as to which remedy to use. But is there ever a scenario where you might say, well, if this person did have Borrelia or Bartonella, maybe combining the homeopathy with some type of herbal remedy that was antimicrobial would make that kind of work synergistically, or is that not?
Well, I think it's unnecessary, but if someone wants to use it, then by all means, I like herbs.
Got it.
I believe in botanicals. I think they're very intelligent.
Yeah.
But I think homeopathy, in many situations, not all, but in many situations, homeopathy transcends even botanicals.
Okay, great. So I was going to then step back a little bit and look at some of the other things people commonly think about when they think about Lyme. So some people will think about parasites. They'll think about candida or candida and fungal overgrowths. They'll think about viruses like Epstein-Barr and HHV6 and those things. So it sounds like those would all be the same in homeopathy, that you wouldn't necessarily look at or care what the bug is, but you would use the symptom to identify a remedy that then is helping to treat the underlying issue.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Do you want me to expound on that? Because I believe that you got it.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. So anything there that you would do differently around parasites, fungus, or virus, or it's
I think it's intelligent to eat. Let's put it this way. It's intelligent to eat well. I mean, that just goes without saying, I would hope.
Yeah.
That we eat nutrient-dense foods, that we source properly if we can. I don't want people to go into neurosis with that. Mm-hmm. But I do want them to eat, intelligently. And that goes without saying, if possible. Not everyone can do that. I work in India, where at the Prasanta Banerji Homeopathic Research Foundation, and I have a fellowship there. And and nutrition is never discussed. It's just not that it simply can't be discussed. For one thing, each doctor is seeing, by the way, they're MDs and they use only homeopathy, but each medical doctor there is seeing 100 patients per day.
Wow.
There are 12 of them, senior doctors. So that means 1,200 people are going through this clinic daily, and it's open 6 days a week, and they've been doing it for 150 years.
Wow.
So the numbers are indisputable. And so the reason I say this is because when people say there's no information on homeopathy and there's no research, there's no data, that's a little ridiculous. That's just one clinic in India. So they're not looking to the right places. They're looking for the AMA to tell them about it, or they're looking for the NCH or something, or NIH, excuse me, to tell them about homeopathic research, and that's not going to come from them. There's no way, because it's the competition. They're not going to share homeopathic information with the community when they believe that their paradigm is the answer. Right. So the reason I bring that up is because there's not only no time to discuss nutrition, but the society there, those folks are very traditional, very religiously traditional. You can't tell someone to eat meat if they're vegetarian, and you can't tell, you can't even get into that. Their eyes will glaze over and say, "What are you kidding me?" I mean, you can't come up with a diet for all these stratums of society in a place like Calcutta.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we don't even get into it, and yet the homeopathy still acts. So we in the Western world have the luxury of living in many ways a very lovely life that allows us to go to Whole Foods and Wegmans and our local health food store and our CSA and know our farmers and support family farms, etc., and choose our foods wisely, or maybe more particularly, with more emphasis on food in that regard, for nutritional and health reasons. But even with that, and I've worked with people who still drink diet soda and still have their McDonald's every morning, and yet it still works. But if you can do both, obviously that's where we're going to go with this.
Okay, perfect. So one of my mentors has been Dr. Dietrich Klinghardt, and over the years he has suggested that the symptoms that people experience with their illness for the most part are not caused by the microbes themselves, but they are caused by the immune system's potentially overreaction to the microbes, that we just aren't having a good relationship with some of these bugs such that the immune system is overreacting, we're creating inflammation and thus symptoms. And so you mentioned that in some cases someone could potentially use a homeopathic no-sode for a specific microorganism. And I'm wondering, when you use that approach in homeopathy, is it that it's just helping to modulate the way the immune system interacts with the bug, or is a no-sode something that can help the body then eliminate the organism?
Well, first of all, let me preface this by saying that I'm not a great fan of using a no-sode for a specific disease, because I find it's not as efficacious as using specifically the symptoms. I know that there are a lot of people who use homeopathy here and there. They're usually the people who are rather new to homeopathy that believe that, oh, well, if someone's got chickenpox, we'll just give them the no-sode for chickenpox. And I find that that's not as efficacious as using something that is like chickenpox. That's what homeopathy means. Homeo meaning similar, homonym, and pathy, of course, meaning pathology. So we're always looking for something similar. We're not looking to recognize exactly what the microorganism is, again, for a couple reasons. One is I don't find it to be as efficacious, but number two is you don't really know that that's the reason for the disease. So you're going down a road that could be long and time consuming. And when it comes to illness, time is of the essence for most folks. Yeah. So yeah, we can use a no-sode. So that was my preface. But What does a no-sode do? Well, again, as in homeopathy, if it acts, then it stimulates the body's natural ability to correct itself, because the body's always looking for homeostasis. That is our correction is when someone eats bad chicken at a restaurant, the reaction of diarrhea is the homeostatic reaction that is a positive reaction. We might not like it, but to give someone something specifically for diarrhea on a conventional medical level is antithetical to what we want. Diarrhea is the answer to get it out. Vomiting is the answer to get it out. That's the natural response. A fever in a child, a nice, good fever of 104, 105 in a young child is a very positive thing. We don't want to suppress that with Tylenol or other medications because we want it to cook off the microorganisms. Now, that's a childhood disease. We're not talking about an adult who has 105 temperature. That's a whole different world. But nonetheless, those are examples of how important it is that we allow the body to do what it's supposed to do to a certain degree when we can. Then when we can't, that's when we employ homeopathy that stimulates that mechanism that the body would have stimulated had it been able to do so. And not always is it able to do so.
Okay, very good. So there will certainly be those people with chronic Lyme that are working with practitioners that have them on antibiotics, and we've talked some thoughts about the antibiotics. Is there any reason that those people cannot also work with a homeopath at the same time? Does doing the antibiotics interfere in any way or make the homeopathy less effective potentially?
No, it doesn't make the homeopathic medicines less effective, but it covers up. It's like it emits a squid-like cloud over the picture, so you don't know what's working.
Right. And
is
then you're
the antibiotic killing the bugs so that now there are no symptoms? Or is the homeopathic medicine acting so that the symptoms are no longer needed because the person is getting well?
And then to your earlier point, potentially the antibiotic itself is creating new symptoms.
Yes, now you got a new disease.
And you may then be using a homeopathic to address a symptom, not of the underlying condition, but a symptom of what you were using to try and treat the condition allopathically.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, sir. I would say that is in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I do love homeopathy. I mean, probably not exactly the same remedies that we're talking about here, but certainly I have benefited from homeopathy over the years of my own recovery. And I still find it interesting that people question whether or not there's validity to homeopathy.
You don't even bother with that. Really, yeah. I'm serious. If someone doesn't questions it, okay, fine. Whatever you want to do, go for it.
Right.
Do what you're comfortable with. If you're not comfortable with the validity of homeopathy, then use antibiotics. Go for it.
So if someone either has leaky gut, or maybe they used antibiotics, they made their gut digestive situation worse, maybe they created some fungal overgrowths. I know on your website you talk a good bit about using homeopathy to help improve the health of the gut. So is that also based on symptoms, or are there specific things that can be done homeopathically to help upregulate the gut itself?
I have a lot of people who come to me and say, I have leaky gut, and I say, well, I don't know what that means. I mean, yes, I know what they're saying, but give me a symptom. Oh, well, my gut's leaking. No. That is an assessment. That is an opinion. That's, excuse me, but I really see it as a theory. And I don't think it's a bad theory, but it is theoretical. And I want ironclad information. What does that mean to you? Well, I have constipation. Now we're talking. So what do you mean by constipation? Does that mean you have difficulty having a stool, or does that mean that you don't have a stool for 5 days? So now we got to be real specific. Or it means that every time I drink milk, or have cheese or yogurt, even high quality kefir, raw milk, etc., homemade, all of that, well sourced, etc. Every time I have that, I get indigestion. Okay, now we're talking. So now we're using a medicine that is specific, homeopathic medicine that is specific for someone who has indigestion. And we use that medicine and it corrects it regardless of whether or not that theory was correct. What if it wasn't leaky gut? What if it's that the lining was sore? What if there was, too much mucosa? What if it was, we could go on and on with all the possibilities here. It's like, I always, when people tell me that their psychiatrist gave them a psychotropic drug for anxiety and depression, and I say, so how does he know that that's what's called for? And they say, well, he told me that my chemistry in my brain is off. I said, really, let me see the MRI. Let's see the blood chemistry. Let's see an x-ray. That's theory. Really? Your blood chemistry is off? How do you know that? How do you know that it's not just hormones? Or maybe that's how they define blood chemistry or the chemistry. They don't say blood, they say chemistry. It's theoretical. And because we've heard it enough times, we start accepting it. And that's not a good way to find the truth. The point is that someone has anxiety or depression, we use homeopathic medicine for that. And regardless of the cause, whether it is chemistry or it's circumstance or it's another drug that's causing it, which is often the case. And we often see, by the way, depression related to gut issues. That's, it's almost a given. Then we correct the gut because we know there are enough gut symptoms to choose from, to choose the homeopathic medicines. And so I don't use one homeopathic medicine. I use 3, 4, 5, sometimes as many as 7. It flies in the face of classical homeopathy for those who have any training in that, but all I can tell you is that it works.
And are these all 7 single remedies, or do you ever use combination remedies as well?
No, generally they're single remedies.
Okay.
Generally.
Because I'm familiar with some of the combination homeopathic remedies like Picana, for example, from Germany, where they use them while they're maybe treating someone to help upregulate liver, kidney, lymphatic, more drainage type remedies.
No, I don't go for that. I don't use that method. I think that's too pot shot. It's just throwing it at the wall to see if it sticks. Now, I'm not saying they don't get results. Don't get me wrong. I believe that they are probably getting results. But I'd rather choose according specifically to the person, to their condition and how it's presenting in that person, instead of saying, oh, gee, this bottle says gut, let's use this one. I don't feel it's tight enough. It's a little, and I hope that I don't mean to criticize. So please, I hope it's not taken this way, but it feels a little sloppy to me. I think we need to be very specific about how it's presenting in this person, because again, it is different in everyone. For all the people who are shown to have Lyme disease, they're not all showing it in the same way. Now, if somebody has chicken pox, it's pretty much the same. It's on the 14th day, they get a fever, they get itching pustules, some of them get it worse than others, but generally speaking, it's the same. But when it comes to Lyme, it can be a myriad of symptoms, so many so that you start wondering, well, gee, maybe it's not that, maybe it's something else.
Right. So if someone comes to you and let's say they have significant anxiety and you are using a homeopathic remedy based on that symptom to address whatever the underlying thing is that's creating that anxiety, how often would we expect them to have a reduction or elimination of their anxiety? And does it sometimes take trying a few different remedies to get
it might take a couple tries, but generally speaking, if folks want to look at anxiety, you can go to my blog. I give you specific protocols for anxiety, a specific homeopathic medicine that is very clear how to use, what potency, what frequency, how often. And if by a certain amount of time you don't see a change, then you can go to a second protocol. So, of course, I don't know who I'm working with when I'm giving this information out. But when I know who I'm working with and I can see that this anxiety is specific, such as anticipatory anxiety, that's a little different than free-floating anxiety. It's also a little different than anxiety after eating. Then it's more of a gut anxiety that's related to that. So we try to be as specific as we possibly can.
Perfect. So I'm guessing this next question is going to come back to a very similar process, but the question is there something in homeopathy that helps to support the body against the toxicity that's ever increasing in our environment? So heavy metals and pesticides and chemicals, there's more and more thought leaders and people talking about how these toxicities really are why we maybe are expressing more symptoms. So you mentioned the Iceman. Well, they didn't have the same toxicity back then. And so now many people think that it's the toxicity that's making the same organisms create more symptoms in people potentially. Just wondering about your thoughts around, is there a place for homeopathy in helping the body deal with the environment that we now live in?
Yeah, I have to tell you that I somewhat disagree.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. The folks who come to me are very sophisticated. They are very careful about where they purchase their food. Many of them are farmers. Some are Amish, Mennonites, Hasidic Jews, people from Iceland, New Zealand, people who have never used any GMOs in their farms or on their farms. They've never used pesticides. They make acid rain. I suppose that's a possibility, but I don't think our environment in North America is nearly as bad as people think it is. And I know that's politically incorrect for me to say that. I believe that the pollution is what I'd call personal pollution. You go to the doctor, a woman goes for an OBGYN checkup, and oh, here, take this pill. You take this every day, you won't get pregnant. It will force the actual meaning of a female human body to not do what it's intended to do. But no problem, take it every day. That's personal pollution. Thank you, Doc. I'll just put it in there Wednesday, Thursday, hold on, Friday, 5 years, 10 years. That is the pollution. We have accepted a world in which no matter what the doctor says, we comply. So, I got a fever. Oh, Tylenol, you better get that. Oh, wait a minute, could be a bacterial infection. Antibiotic, 2 weeks, maybe a month. Wait a minute, hold on. It wasn't an antibiotic, it was viral. Hold on, that was the wrong steroids, creams, ointments. We live in a world of personal pollution that we ourselves have not only agreed to, we paid for it. We actually paid him. Here, Doc, tell me more how I can pollute myself. That's what I think is causing the pollution. So is it pesticides? Well, I'm going to go back and say that these folks that I work with would never put anything to their lips that had a pesticide on it, or that had a GM that was grown as a GMO, or that was et cetera, et cetera. I mean, they haven't done so for 20 years, 50 years. So I start with that premise because it's not the side effects of the drugs that I worry about. It's what drugs do to get those symptoms and those conditions and suppress them and drive them to a deeper state. So if a child has eczema and steroids are used, you can pretty much count on that child's going to end up with asthma or gut problem in no time, as long as you're using those steroids. Even pediatricians know that eczema is related to asthma, but I don't know that they recognize their input and how what they have done may have caused that to progress to a deeper disease. So eczema is very uncomfortable, itchy, unsightly. Asthma could be life-threatening. Big difference. So it's driving it to a deeper state in the human experience.
So when someone uses a homeopathic remedy that is the right remedy for their symptoms, or based on their symptoms,
their condition,
for their condition based on their symptoms,
Yep.
How soon should they expect to see something positive indicating that that remedy is probably a good thing for them? Is it right away? Does it take weeks? Does it take months?
No, in some people you can see a change within a couple of days, enough of a change that you say, oh my gosh, I think I'm on the right track. But more often than not, when I meet with folks and when I teach this in my courses, I teach them to assess in about 6 to 8 weeks. In that amount of time, we should be able to see that this is a little improved, a little less intense. It's not lasting for as long a period of time. And there's a larger space between each of the episodes in which it presents. So let's go back to fibromyalgia. Let's say someone has fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue. And on a scale of 1 to 10, that fibromyalgia is a whopping 7. And it's every single day. And it's from the time they get up until about 4 in the afternoon, and then they get a little bit of a break. The fatigue is really bad from 3 in the afternoon till about 6 at night. Now, once they start taking the homeopathic medicines over a period of 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, now we see that the chronic fatigue is still there, but it's not every day. And it's not lasting 3 hours or 4 hours, now it's lasting an hour. The fibromyalgia, instead of being a 7, is now a 4. And instead of it being from the time they get up in the morning till 4 in the afternoon, now it's time they get up in the morning till about 10. And now instead of it happening every single day, now we see it happening every second or third day. And it gives us, first of all, it makes it clear that we're on the right track. Secondly, it gives us hope. But thirdly, just because the medicine is only done 40% doesn't mean it can't give us 90. So those are just indicators that we have chosen correctly, and that tells us, okay, we're on the right track, continue.
So if the symptoms have come from a 7 to a 4, let's say, you're on the right track, does that generally mean they need to use that remedy for a longer period of time?
Yes.
Does it
Yeah.
sometimes mean that a different remedy might be
No,
needed?
generally,
No.
if it's that clear,
Yeah.
if it's that positive, Scott, then I would stay with it. It would be foolish to tinker with success. You want to continue.
And so let's say someone had chronic fatigue syndrome or fibromyalgia or chronic Lyme, whatever symptoms they're presenting with, they improve with the remedy. Do they generally then need to continue doing that same remedy for a fairly long period of time?
Could be. Oh, yeah, sure. It certainly could be.
So
A lot
months
of
or
times people
years in some cases?
Yeah, and allergies take a couple of years sometimes, a year, 2 years. But meanwhile, you're assessing every 6 to 8 weeks, assessing. And you're looking for the minutia. You want even the tiniest bit of improvement or disprovement. You want to see one way or the other so that you have your information. You're always in observation mode at the end of that period of time. Not day to day, because you know what, when you go to a museum and you look at a painting and you get up too close and it's orange and yellow splotches, but when you have that distance of space, this is distance of time is what I'm describing. Now you can see whether or not there's a net gain.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I tell people commonly that when you're dealing with something like fibromyalgia, Lyme, don't look from one day to the next. Don't look from 1 week to the next generally. Usually it's, am I better today than I was 3 months ago? Am I better than I was a year ago? It sometimes can be a long process for people.
And it's very rarely linear. Mm-hmm. Wellness doesn't come in a straight line. Very few things in life do. Mm-hmm. So we're going to see 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And now sometimes I hear people say, oh my gosh, I've gone backwards. That must mean, no, distance, give it more time. You wouldn't eat a green banana. You got to allow this to ripen.
So let's say someone comes, and I'm just going to use chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia rather than Lyme at this point, because chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia are terms that somewhat more represent the symptoms that the person's experiencing compared to Lyme.
And it's actually not just the symptoms, they're actually a better diagnosis because there it is. So there it is.
Let's say someone comes in, they've had fibromyalgia for 10 years, they start on a homeopathic. How many of those people would we expect to see some benefit? Is it, half the people respond to homeopathy? Is it 90%, 10%? Any kind of thoughts around how frequently homeopathy is successful?
When I was explaining describing what goes on at the Prasanta Banerji Homeopathic Research Foundation, where I have my fellowship privileges, they say that 80 to 85% of those people who use the first protocol, the protocol that is most often used, for example, for chronic fatigue, they will respond. If they don't, then they're part of that remaining 15%. Then we go to the second protocol. And those people often respond up to about 95% of the population responds to that. If they still don't respond, then we go to the third protocol. So we're looking to go to 100%. I'm not going to say that every single person will get to the finish line, but I believe, and this is borne out time and again, that homeopathy has the ability to uproot all diseases. Now, it doesn't mean that all people who have that disease can be taken to the full end, because if it's a 90-year-old man, how much time do we have? If it's a 2-year-old child, we've got a lot more time. Less drugs, fewer poor, life experiences that we have to overcome.
So in the realm of chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and even I will throw Lyme back into this question. So in those populations of people, of which there's millions of people around the world that are struggling every day with those conditions, Why is it that we don't hear more about homeopathy? Is it because figuring out the remedy based on the symptoms is fairly complex and thus there aren't that many really trained homeopaths? Is it I don't know. I mean, what you're saying sounds really positive.
Too good to be true, right?
Well, no, I didn't say it that way, but I said it sounds really positive, and so then I'm wondering, why aren't we seeing more people with those conditions using homeopathy?
In North America, you're absolutely right. In Europe, that's not the way it is. There are homeopathic hospitals and medical schools, and in India, there are medical schools, homeopathy hospitals and clinics, and many of the doctors there use it, and South America, even Cuba, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I actually
and I am not a fan of Castro, but I got to tell you, they are using homeopathy because it's so inexpensive compared.
Well, and I forget exactly which condition it was, but Dr. Klinghardt recently talked about some homeopathic study that they had done literally on like 2 million people I want to say it was to reduce the incidence of leptospirosis, though
it was leptospirosis, and it causes death.
Yeah.
High, a mortality rate that is noteworthy. I wouldn't say it's high, but it was a mortality rate every spring when the rains came in. The rats were prevalent in the cities, and they had noteworthy mortality rate. Nonetheless, with this homeopathic medicine, and in that case, it's interesting that you should bring that up because they did use the no-sode in that case.
Yeah. Yeah.
They did use no-sode. Yeah.
The results were remarkable. In fact, Dr. Klinghardt was saying, he's like, that's the biggest study I've ever seen on homeopathy. Yes. He's like 2 million people participated in this event.
Yeah.
It sounds like it comes back a lot to what you were saying earlier, that there's other things that are more used in North America, and that homeopathy is essentially some competition to those things, and thus it's just not as frequently utilized in North America,
which is unfortunate. Our science in this world, in North America, has been frozen in concretized dungeon of orthodoxy. And the reason is because it is a market out there. And don't get me wrong, I do believe in the free market. I absolutely believe in that. But this is one of those times when, as a consumer, you really need to know your medicine. Just like you need to know what mortgage to choose, which car to buy, you better know your medicines and the side effects. However, it's been harder for people to learn that until the internet. Now it's become a little easier, but there are a lot of tricks going on the internet, and a lot of trolling and trying to get rid of anything that's pro-homeopathy. I don't know how much time we have to talk about this, Scott, but I think it's absolutely fascinating, and you're certainly welcome to take this out, edit this out. But homeopathy was very big in our country, in the U.S., up until the 1940s. We had over 100, just about 100 homeopathic hospitals in the United States up until the 1940s. Now, I'm from Buffalo, New York, and we had 3. One large one and 2 other smaller ones. New York had 5 or 6. Every city had several homeopathic hospitals, and they were, some of them were larger than the conventional allopathic hospitals. And so you had the allopaths, those who believed in conventional drugs and surgery, and then you had the homeopaths. Both had gone to medical school, both were medical doctors. And so what happened in the 1940s was the advent of antibiotics and psychotropic drugs. And so because of that going out on the market, the allopaths finally had something. They had surgery before, and don't get me wrong, I do believe surgery can be a very valuable tool when truly necessary. So the homeopaths up until that time would send their patients to surgeons if they needed it. And surgeons would perhaps vice versa send their patients to homeopaths from time to time. But with the advent of those 2 categories of drugs, they finally had something more than bloodletting, leaching, mercury and morphine. And so when that happened, the pharmaceutical industry burgeoned. And the American Medical Association, which was started about a couple decades before that time, which parenthetically is a trade organization to protect allopathic medicine, by the way, organized because they were the second trade organization, medical organization in the U.S. The first one was the American Homeopathic Association. And so when they formed, they formed to do one thing. They had one goal and one goal only, at least at the very onset, and that was to get rid of the competition. Who was the competition? The homeopathic physicians. And so they created a stellar, and I mean stellar. I have a background in marketing, and so I've read this marketing scheme that they organized, and it was brilliant. And they went after the homeopaths and destroyed homeopathy in a few less than a decade, even less, 5 years, 6 years. And they destroyed homeopathy. Homeopathy did not know what hit them. It was so powerful and so smart and so clean that you got rid of their competition. And It's been like that ever since. So when they finished with the homeopaths, let me just parenthetically also mention, when they finished with the homeopaths, they said, okay, they dusted off their hands and they said, okay, who else should we go after that fights, who is in the market square that fights against us? And they said, oh, the chiropractors, let's go after them. But the chiropractors saw what had happened to the homeopaths and they organized, which is what the homeopaths should have done. They should have organized better.
Wow.
And more with better arms, so to speak.
So let's
they're fighting it to this day. Chiropractors are still fighting the AMA and the likes.
And I'm glad that they are, because there's certainly a lot of benefits to many of the chiropractors that I've
is a very valuable medical method. Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. So I have a couple of wrap-up questions. One being, people commonly ask, should I get the flu shot? And I think you talk about this a little on your website as well. Is there a place for those people that maybe don't want to do a flu shot? Is there a place for homeopathy? And would they then use that before they get the flu, or would they wait until they had symptoms to know which remedy to match that to?
Well, some people believe that if you take influenzainum, which again, there's a no-so for you. Again, you can purchase that in advance, that you can protect yourself from the flu, but you really have to know which strain it is. And I certainly do trust those homeopathic pharmacies that are manufacturing these in the US and in Canada and Europe. But I have not used those. I usually, for myself and my family, we use, if we get the flu, we get sick, then we just use the homeopathic medicine, and it usually takes care of it in short order. And I talk about that on my blog too, as well. Which homeopathic medicine do you use instead of this or that?
Well, and it's interesting because a lot of people then they get the flu and they go get oscillococcinum, I believe it's called, and they don't really even realize that is an implementation of homeopathic medicine, correct?
Oh, so of sorts, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I think it's homeopathic duck liver or something.
That's exactly what it is. It's waterfowl. Yeah, it's the liver and heart of a duck that lives on the water. And so I find that oscillococcinum, and I think it's a good medicine. I just don't use it myself very often. I use this other method. I wait until I get sick and then I take it because I don't want to take too many homeopathic medicines. I think, again, that can be a little sloppy. I'd rather be more specific. But what I find is that it's better for wet, rainy season type colds and flus. Having said that, it is the top selling medicine in all of France over the counter, including allopathic medicine.
Interesting. That's amazing. So let's talk just a little bit about people who are environmentally sensitive. Maybe it's that grass and pollen season. Maybe it's other sensitivities they have. Maybe they have sensitivities to walking into a moldy building. Maybe they eat certain things and they know that they react to certain foods because they develop more immediate reactions. Is there a place where homeopathy then can help with those reactivities?
You bet. That's where I come from. That's what I suffered. I had very severe chemical sensitivities, environmental illness. I was not even able to leave my home for years. There were times when the only way I could get out is to wear a mask. And it was a very dark time in my life. And I believe it was preceded by antibiotics and some other medications that I still believed in that paradigm. And yes, there is a place for that. And I believe I talk about that also on my blog. And I don't mean to keep sending people there, but it's all free, so we might as well take advantage of it.
Absolutely.
Calc-carb is one of the main medicines that I use for that. Calcarea carbonicum, it's called calc-carb for short. And depending on whether it's more mold-oriented or more dust or fur, animal fur or chemical sensitivities, that will determine whether or not we use it in a higher potency or a lower potency and how frequently.
Perfect. One of the challenges that people have with chronic illnesses is that it often either is preceded by some mental, emotional trauma or conflict, or the process of going through an illness where you're often invalidated. That in and of itself can lead to some kind of a PTSD or a mental, emotional trauma. Is there a place where homeopathy can help us work through those mental, emotional challenges?
Yes.
and it's again based on the
So basically what I'm saying is to most of your questions is yes, homeopathy addresses that. And let's say if there is post-traumatic stress syndrome and the person has chronic fatigue and they have, it shows up as Lyme in the blood test, and they have joint pain, muscle pain, etc. We would use a medicine that's specific for the PT, the post-traumatic stress disorder. We would use something that's specific for the chronic fatigue, something that's specific for the joints. And if the evidence was screaming at us that this is certainly Lyme, and it is a rather fresh case of Lyme, then we might use Borrelia or something like that.
Perfect. So for people that have been listening and they're thinking, wow, I'd like to try this, how do people find a homeopath that can really help them along the lines of the way that you're implementing homeopathy?
Well, I was a classical homeopath for many years. I taught the first classical homeopathic course in New York State that was ever credit-bearing in a college. So I was a dyed-in-the-wool classical homeopath, and that started back 31 years ago. And so when I was in practice for all those years and teaching, what I found frustrating was that I could only teach folks how to use homeopathy for acute conditions, such as colds, flus, bee sting, broken bone, that kind of thing. And I couldn't teach them how to use something for chronic. And what today's discussion is about, of course, is our chronic conditions. So classical homeopathy was not only difficult for me to teach and to give to families, which is a big part of my mission, is to teach families how to be able to take care of their own as much as possible. But also, I found it to be pokey. Excuse me for my vernacular, but it was just too darned slow. And it was an awful long time it took a long time to take a case. And also it was too slow in the running because you could only use one homeopathic medicine at a time in classical homeopathy. Sometimes you can get away with two. If you were kind of breaking the rules, maybe three. But so I found it very frustrating. And that's why I look for protocols, because there are protocols out there that are specific for conditions. Just as I said, if you use a protocol in 85% of the population for that specific condition, you can count on that medicine acting. So I don't know of anyone teaching this to the wider public in the US or North America or even Europe, this method, which is the Banerji protocols, plus some other protocols that I've just come across in my studies and that other teachers have taught me through the years. From all, many of my teachers came from all over the world. And so I was always looking for protocols so that it could become easier for me and easier to teach. There is a woman, I understand, in Japan who teaches this method to a certain degree, but you have to know Japanese.
But are there practitioners? In fact, the Banerji that you were talking about, I thought that I have a friend who's a chiropractor here locally, and he had mentioned once before to me, and it sounded like the same place. I thought that occasionally they had maybe people that come to North America, or there was some way to access that system somehow. They can
speak in the U.S. They've spoken at this is the father and son team, Dr. Prasanta and Dr. Pratik Banerji, and they have come to Anderson Cancer Institute and NIH and Anderson, and Roswell Cancer Institute, etc., to teach oncologists mostly. They're usually teaching about cancer, how to treat cancer with homeopathy. So, and yes, they're incredible. They're excellent. But what you're looking for is someone to work with for something like Lyme that is, if it turns out to be that it is indeed active Lyme, they're going to look at it not as Lyme, because I've never heard of Lyme in India. I don't think it exists there. I think you have to have that tick that sits on a deer that only lives in cooler climates. So, and not that I'm looking for more clients because I have a very busy schedule, but I work on Skype. I don't work with people in my office.
Okay.
I work with people from all over the world. And so if people are interested in asking questions, they can certainly go to my website and ask questions, and my assistant will respond pretty quickly.
Great. So you mentioned it earlier, but as we wrap up, so what is your website? Where can people find you? And I understand you also have a free gift for people listening to this show, and maybe you can tell us about that as well.
Yes, well, I urge folks to go to my website because I have a lot of free information. And it's joettecalabrese.com. And even if you misspell my name, it'll show up, joettecalabrese.com. And what was your other question? Yeah. Okay, so if you go there will be on the front page, there'll be a little statement there that says, welcome, Lymies, or something like that. Lyme Summit folks. And then you just click on it and they can download it. And it gives you specific protocols that are specific to the conditions that are most frequent, such as chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. I can't remember what we put on there. It's an infographic, what we put on there, but there are specific, and it tells you exactly what remedy and what potency and et cetera, what frequency.
Beautiful,
so
beautiful.
It will get people.
I've been on the website already, but that was before when I went out there. That wasn't there yet, so I'm going to go back.
No, it's not there yet. I'm sure by the time this presents, it will be there.
Okay, excellent. Well, I want to thank you for your time today. I certainly learned some new things. I think there's a lot of good information for people to get out of this show. I appreciate your time. I think we can learn a lot from your work and your website, and I want to thank you very much for being here today.
Oh, Scott, it's been my pleasure completely.
Thank you. For more information on today's guest, visit joettecalabrese.com. That's joettecalabrese.com. joettecalabrese.com. That's joettecalabrese.com. I appreciate your support of the Better Health Guy blogcasts series. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Facebook and Twitter as Better Health Guy. The show can be found on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. If you'd like to support the show, please visit betterhealthguy.com/donate. And if you'd like to be added to my newsletter, please visit betterhealthguy.com/newsletters. I'm looking forward to many more shows ahead and appreciate your interest.
Thanks for listening to this Better Health Guy blogcast with Scott, your Better Health Guy. To check out additional shows and learn more about Scott's personal journey to better health, please visit betterhealthguy.com.